So hello for the next 12 Joint Architecture Weekly and GitHub sponsors webinar. Today we have again special guest. I see that we will be having probably more of special guests than just me talking about stuff, which is cool. And today we have Jeremy Miller, my friend Jeremy Miller. As for sure all of you, or at least almost all of you, know that we are working together on Marten, and we had already our samples, like I had for my talks, Jeremy for his. We had also on some of our repos, but actually we didn't join our forces to try to maybe like build something that could be like, you know, correlating our both thoughts. So that was the initial idea for our webinar. And also Jeremy was constantly joking that I'm product owner of event sourcing part. So that was the idea, that maybe we could try to refactor some of that, like taking my sample and just joining that with Jeremy thoughts and teaching me how to do stuff in Wolverine. So is that correct, Jeremy? Would you like to add something more?
No, but I wasn't actually joking when I said I thought of you as our product manager for event sourcing. So
yeah. So today's webinar for sure will be more for .NET folks, but we will try to keep it lightweight, and we want to discuss some architecture stuff. So to see and discuss what was the reasoning for some decisions, like the biggest design stuff, etc. So I hope that even non.NET people can benefit out of that. So yeah, Jeremy, would you like to tell us a few words about you, if you'd like to, or at least about Wolverine before we go on?
sure. So I'm Jeremy Miller. I live in Austin, Texas. Been primarily on the Microsoft stack with a few forays into enterprise Java, and everybody's done Node.js through the years. Been doing this for way too long. Very active in the .NET open source community. An occasional speaker and author here and there. And of course, I work with Oscar on Marten, and now the Wolverine tool we're going to combine with Marten today to form up the full Critter stack.
Yeah, the funny thing was that we are working together. I mean, working, if we can call open source working, then we are working together for like, I don't know, 5 or 7 years. I stopped counting, but we saw ours for the first time live on last NDC Oslo. And this talk that I gave there, it will be also a starting point for our refactoring, because I showed there how to build some simple, like a single module or even almost single file application using .NET, Marten, and CQRS and event sourcing. So maybe let me just show you a few slides, but there will be not many of them, I promise. So just to give you the at first business information about what we are doing. So the business case for that will be the support help desk management system. So we have, of course, support team, we have users, and the central piece of what we will be talking today will be the help desk ticket, or as we are calling that professionally, incident. In theory, I'm certified in this help desk management, but it's like with all certificates, so I'm not an expert here. But let's say that the story of the incident is at first someone just needs to register in the system to be able to log incident. So in other, just just say that something is not working as it should. So after that, the agent is assigned, so support person that will be handling this ticket. And then, of course, it needs to be prioritized, categorized, etc. And after that, agent is responding. Of course, most of the cases, the answer is it works on my side, but usually customer responds and giving more details, and that discussion can be continued for quite some time. And after that, there is a case that agent finally realizes that it's not working on their case, on their side, and resolving the incident. Then, of course, client needs to acknowledge the resolution, and after that, the incident is closed and we can call it a day. So from the business perspective, that's more or less the case. And from the technical standpoint, we have a classical Martin application. So we have all the events stored as modeled as records, as immutable objects. We won't be focusing much today around event sourcing and Martin. I mean, besides what we will need to discuss our approach, but in general, those are all events that I described within the process that are modeled as in our code. And after that, we also need to have some entity. We won't be doing DDD today because we don't want to make angry our special guest. And we won't be using, of course, repositories. I'm always joking about that with Jeremy. I like when looking at his face when he hear that. And
I like DDD in theory. I just don't like DDD as it's practiced.
yeah. I mean, I'm also like the main principles behind the DDD. So focus on the business, focus on the language, but I don't like necessarily all the ceremony that sometimes those technical implementation are bringing. So this stuff is already trying to keep things simple. So we have entity, which is built from events, and we have a brief explanation how we apply our events as they go. And yeah, because see, DDD. So yeah. And at first we are creating when incident is logged, then we are marking whether there are some outstanding responses for agent to acknowledge. Then agent marks that status as resolved. Then maybe customer marks that at yes, that's correct, it's resolved, and that's all. And we don't have aggregates here, but you could, in theory, model that if you prefer. We have a simple functions that are taking commands or commands and the state, and then making some basic decision, and as a result, storing events. So it's those are simple, pure functions that are just, running the business logic, etc. So nothing spectacular, but that's probably the hardest logic. So like, can you resolve incident? You can, if it wasn't resolved already, or if it doesn't have any outstanding responses, etc. And after that, we have the minimal API application written in .NET. And minimal is, of course, the regular for other stacks, but it's minimal comparing to what we had
Sinatra
before.
Style.
Yeah.
It's Sinatra style from the mid 2000s, or probably Express.js for most people.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm joking a bit about that, but I believe that it's a good step. And we will see more of that even further with Wolverine, right?
Well, Wolverine's definitely not going to be Sinatra flavored,
Mhm.
um, but hopefully minimal.
Yeah. So we have Martin configuration. Again, we are just setting up some connection streaks, schema, configuring the serialization to use latest, the greatest system text JSON, and we are setting up projections to build read models. And we have also some additional integration with Kafka and SignalR, but we'll see later on, can we get to that? And those are, ASP.NET and SignalR configurations. And after that, we have this single file application, almost single file, because we have all of those endpoints defined, as I mentioned, as the minimal API. So we are just defining the endpoint with a root and then saying what we are doing. And in general, for command handling, we are taking command, running the service that I showed before, and storing a result in Martin. And get an update is just a simple wrapper for write to aggregate. That is just taking version. So we are using optimistic concurrency and storing the result event. So more or less, that's how this sophisticated application looks like. Do we have any questions before we start to refactor this sample and move towards the Wolverine? And feel free to ask questions on chat or even with voice, because we will try today to make this engaging as possible. So don't be shy. And it's our first time that we are doing that together with Jeremy. So feel free to do that. The question is this a public repo? Yes, it's on my eventsourcing.net repository. And I will also paste that later, the link and also the stage that we will end up, because we don't know how far we will go today. Okay, so maybe Jeremy, why would you consider to refactor that and use here Wolverine? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So, a couple different things. So, from a one for one perspective, if we really dug deeply into minimal API, um, the .NET implementation of it, it's actually got a lot more performance overhead than I think people would expect. It's there's a lot of unexpected activity that's happening in there. Wolverine HP, it's going to beat minimal API on pure performance. Probably not what you really care about the most here.
Mm-hmm.
From a code per code perspective, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. Here, it will a little bit. Where Wolverine, and specifically, I'm talking about the HTTP handler part of Wolverine, where it really is going to shine when we're combining it to build a CQRS with event sourcing application, also using Martin. That's where this is going to shine. It has a lot of support. Has support out of the box for external asynchronous messaging that we're not going to get into today. It could be used as a mediator tool, which we're also not going to get into today. But the integration with Martin in the middleware, where it's going to create what I think is a very simple code pattern for using event sourcing end to end, not just capturing events, but being able to opt into optimistic concurrency protection, error handling, and resiliency is going to be a big thing. And if I don't know if we'll go far enough today to show it, but integrated outbox with Martin, so you would be able to also publish events directly out of the Wolverine integration, even if that's just to publish it locally for asynchronous processing after the endpoint.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Cool. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to speak or place it via chat. I will be trying to have a look on the chat window and as we go. So we should probably start with adding new nugget package, right?
Yes. Actually, grab two. I know you've already walked through this, but grab the Wolverine FX.http and then grab the Martin integration as well.
Yep. So maybe you could tell like about, because we see here a lot of Wolverine nuggets. So maybe you could tell like what's the reasoning behind it, or how would you, like why did you decide that each of it will be a separate thing? Because some look for me quite obvious, like for example Azure Service Bus, Amazon SQS, but some look quite orthogonal, like Fluent Validation, Memory Pack, etc. So maybe some
Sure,
general
sure.
story around the Wolverine.
Well, so it's the constant tension when you're building any kind of framework. You don't want to necessarily bundle every possible integration in the core product. That's one that bloats the size of the users users application. It also sets users up for potential diamond dependency problems. You mentioned some of them. I think are pretty self evident. You use the RabbitMQ package if you're doing asynchronous messaging with Wolverine through RabbitMQ or
Mm-hmm.
through Amazon Service Bus. The Fluent Validation package that adds middleware to Wolverine message handling or command handling with Fluent Validation. And there's a slightly different recipe for HTTP endpoints versus pure message handling. Just the just taking that as an example, the message handling, it just logs, hey, this was a bad message. I'm getting this out of there. On the HTTP side, it takes the Fluent Validation errors, bundles that up into problem details, writes that out to the response for you, does a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So think of these as add-ons, like the memory pack and message pack, that if you want to opt into alternative serializers that are potentially faster, but not quite as universally applicable as our good old-fashioned Newtonsoft and your Mark and Oscar's absolute favorite tool in the entire world, system.text.json. So there are things you can opt into that you don't necessarily want to
Mm-hmm.
be coming in out of the box.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that in Martin we were quite shy in calling Martin a framework, but Wolverine is kind of like a central piece, like an engine for um,
Yes.
coordinating message passing. So then we have all of those transports, and also the storage, those Martin and entity framework, and also like we need to have all of those glue around serialization, right? Is it correct?
It's those are opt-in,
Mm-hmm.
so we're good to go. We are absolutely good to go. Wolverine out of the box is it actually defaults to STJ now,
Mm-hmm.
but it still comes with Newtonsoft as an option out of the box as well.
Mm-hmm. I think that we can also cut the Martin command line for now.
Yes.
Because what's worth saying is that Wolverine is also coming with some command line tooling, but we will get to that later on. So let's go further. When we added the Wolverine, then my guess is that everything should work as it was before. So what should we do to enable, or what would be the next step if we already have some Martin application and we would like to add some, the Wolverine stuff to it?
Okay. So we're going to do a couple different things. We can use Martin as strictly a messaging, but since you and I have talked about this, we're going to use it as the HP layer as well.
Mm-hmm.
First, let's come to the top of this file, of your program file here. So maybe right underneath builder. I mean, this isn't order dependent, but
Mm-hmm.
builder.host.use Wolverine. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do very much in here, but go ahead and there's an optional Lambda here to just exactly like our add Martin. But yeah, call that. All right. And then the only thing I want to say is opt.policies dot auto transactions, something other, auto apply transactions. Okay. We'll need to do a little bit more if we ever decided to use the outbox, but that's enough for right now.
Mm-hmm.
Then I want to add Martin specific middleware to our application with Wolverine. So let's find where you called add Martin. I
Mm-hmm.
can see it just below.
Yep.
So scroll down to the bottom, add one more line. You already know what to do. So integrate with Wolverine. Okay, so what we're doing there, this is setting up the base. This is adding middleware support for Wolverine. It's telling Wolverine that, hey, Martin is going to be Saga persistence. It's going to use PostgreSQL. The underlying PostgreSQL database for Martin is going to be the message storage for a transactional inbox and outbox and scheduled messaging in Wolverine. And it's adding some specific Martin middleware to Wolverine handlers that we're going to utilize here in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So that's given us Wolverine core. That's given us integration with Martin. Let's do one more thing. If you'll come down to where you start mapping minimal API endpoints.
Yep.
All right. So now say app.map Wolverine endpoints. And we can get by with just pure basics here, complete out of the box basics.
Map.
And while he does that, I am going to go find my sample of this.
I think that we need to add one more.
Wolverine fx.http.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that just to maybe share my perspective, when I first saw that, why do I need to at first, I'm already using Wolverine, then maybe it could already somehow magically automatically find out about Martin. But then I realized that one of the things that we would like to do in Martin is that we don't want to do like a vendor locking. Of course, we want to push people to use more of our libraries, but we don't want necessarily to like having you know, to force anyone just to use all of that, right, Jeremy?
There's that. And then there is some of it is just the limitations of the host builder, the web application factory, that the Wolverine needs to be baked into the host, which this .NET forces you to do that before you can start mapping HTTP endpoints. So that's why you still have to say use Wolverine and map Wolverine endpoints down below.
Mm-hmm.
That take that one up. If you don't like that, and I don't myself, you can take that up with the ASP.NET core team themselves.
And a question, Jeremy, about sorry, I will just show myself. Diamond here. Yeah, and the question about this, the requirement for being close to the host is because of some background processing, basically of the Wolverine that is leveraged on the host, or
Yes. So Wolverine needs to Wolverine needs to throw several things into the service, the DI container, and it's also using a hosted service to actually start up Wolverine itself.
okay. Thanks.
And I have a question around that, because you already mentioned that we can have an outbox and inbox. I don't think that we will be talking much about that, at least at the beginning. I'm not even sure how to enable that, but my question is how does the Wolverine processing is different from, for example, the custom eye projection stuff. So how much Wolverine is reusing what we have in Martin underneath?
None whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Do you want to talk about that for a second? Because we have to talk about, if we're going to do that, we have to talk about future plans, current state versus future plans, right?
Yeah,
So,
maybe let's try to make it as simple as possible, and then maybe we can go back to that after the endpoint stuff.
so I think I would leave that alone right now.
Okay.
Just by saying integrate with Wolverine up above, you have completely enabled all of the outbox infrastructure. The only other thing with Wolverine is when you are publishing, whether it's publishing to a local in-memory queue or publishing to RabbitMQ, Azure Service Bus, Kafka later on when I get around to that. You do have to opt into using making every individual endpoint durable, as opposed to a fire and forget endpoint. Come up above. We'll do this real quick. So let's say if we were using Wolverine to kick things out and kick things out directly from Wolverine's publishing rather than the projection approach you're using with Martin, say opt.policies. There should be an option in here that's like all senders are durable or something. I've slept through then. Can you scroll? Yeah, there you go. That guy right there. So this may not be what you want to do necessarily. You may want more fine-grained control, but this is saying that all outbound publishing is going to be done through now with durable transactional outboxes. And let's do one last thing. Actually, not here. Go down to the Martin integration again. All right, we say .integrate with Wolverine. There's one more .forward events, something. So we're not actually taking advantage of this today. This won't do anything. But if that option were in place, so let's say that you need to, as you persist events, you determine what events should be persisted. Then you also need to take some kind of additional action after the fact on those new events. If you had a Wolverine subscription for whatever that event type is, this event forwarding to Wolverine will automatically toss that out through Wolverine's outbox automatically. If there were any known subscriptions, and because we have no subscription set up for Wolverine, and I don't think we should bother with that right now. This won't do anything. It's harmless.
Yes.
But the difference between your projection approach, your projection publishing approach, and this is this would forward immediately as soon as the event is published through the classic kind of outbox. It's I'm going to persist the new event and a record of the outgoing message. If the transaction succeeds, then the outgoing messages get kicked out after the fact. And there's a ton of code to make sure it actually happens. That messaging would happen faster. It would happen immediately, but it doesn't come with the ordering guarantee that you get from using your daemon version of your. So what Oscar's showing you here, this is after the fact, going through the events that have already persisted in order, trying to kick these out to Kafka in order, in a strict ordering thing. It won't be as fast as the event forwarding, but you get the strict ordering guarantee. So
yeah. So this is the vanilla Martin approach. So you would subscribe, and Martin through the async daemon will be automatically in the background polling for events that we stored and then republishing. But if I understood you correctly, then we in Wolverine you will have the transactional outbox, so the message will be published in the same scope as we are storing the event potentially, right?
Yes, stores first, the transaction has to succeed, and then the outgoing message gets kicked out. So that's already fully functional. That is available to be used right now. It just doesn't come with the the ordering guarantee, which your Kafka thing doesn't actually order things correctly, but we'll get back to that. So just let everybody know that first class subscriptions to Martin, that is definitely a feature that's planned out that hopefully happens this year. But we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, but it's still pretty neat that you can just automatically configure the basic communication and outbox and republishing events to external messaging system with Wolverine. I think that's pretty neat. Okay, let's move on. Then maybe we could try to tackle how we can do such stuff easier with Wolverine or simpler. Of course, simpler is dangerous word because one can say that it's simple, but the other will tell that it's contrary. But let's say that from your perspective, let's see the Jeremy's way. How would it differ from what we see here?
Okay, so I've actually done this one. So we were talking about this before. First thing I think I'd ask you to do, here, I'm going to send you the code for this in the chat window.
Cool.
Oscar.
Okay.
The first thing I want you to do is just go to the log incident request. If you could just navigate to that input real quick.
Yeah, it's here. Or to the service. This one.
No, to the actual. Let's go to the actual input body itself. So log incident request itself.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's a half a point here. Now, could you, just for fun, could you move that to its own file real quick? F6.
Okay.
All right, and then there's a reason why I wanted to do this. So that piece of code that I just put, copy pasted in there. If you could, from the chat window, if you copy paste that in here, and then let's talk about it a little bit.
Cool. Let me.
And while he's doing that, folks, while Oscar and I were putting this together, we realized Oscar and I have a few different opinions and approaches to some of this. So we're gonna talk about that as well. And y'all are absolutely, of course, I think some things are preference. You can decide for yourself what's important, what do you like best yourself. But this kind of organization, working with some early clients on Wolverine, this is something I think is working out pretty well, is to say, let's have a single file. Let's treat Wolverine HP endpoints as really, I'm sending a command to the HP endpoint. So we're going to tend to bundle almost all of the information into the body of the request itself. Just as it's not pure REST, but it makes it easier. I also think it's turned out to be relatively easy to organize things by the command type itself. So you see, we dumped the static class here with one function to handle the HP endpoint. I think it's working out pretty well to organize things by the command type itself. And then let's go down and maybe look at some of the differences here. So this is something Oscar and I Oscar stumbled on. I didn't have a good answer for. Wolverine today doesn't have any idea of URL groups, so that's something that's gonna happen soon as follow-up from this. But you see the Wolverine post attribute. Try it for a world where you don't need a lot of attributes, but it's an imperfect world. So there's one attribute that's always required for any endpoint just to express the URL. And it's pretty explicit where you're writing out the entire URL. This is scar tissue for me of a previous open source web framework I worked on, where you had all kinds of rules about determining what the URL is based on the name of the holding class and the method, and a whole bunch of different elements of the code were all put together to figure out what the URL is. You see this all the time in MVC and the ASP.NET Core world. I've always found that to be a little bit problematic of that extra reasoning of what's handling this request. There's a lot of times where I think you do a grep style search for, let me go find this exact URL to see what handles it. So anyway, what we're trying to go aim for here is getting to the point where most Wolverine handlers can be pure functions. Stick some inputs in, get expected outcomes out. Try as much as possible to use synchronous methods. One thing I think you can see right off the bat is you can see we're taking in the request body. That makes sense. We're taking in a route parameter, the customer ID. That makes sense. That's pretty common. But where this starts to get weird, if you're used to MVC core in the .NET world, or I don't know, I haven't looked at Java Spring stuff in years. There's a little bit of convention right off the bat. Datetime offset now. Wolverine's going to pass in the current time and UTC there. But that's just a built-in convention. It's done purposely to try to make testing a little easier. And you see, we're not actually working directly with Martin itself. We're returning a tuple. We're returning two things from this method. One is that GUID identified response. This is something I made up for this. This is going to kind of tag, hey, here's the incident ID, and here's the URL. So this is a little bit of special Wolverine stuff, that response body. It's doing a couple things to the HTTP response itself. It is tagging it with a status code 201. It's adding the URL to the location header so that we're REST compliant here. But it's doing so in a way that Wolverine can look at the signature of this method, and it can try to glean out some information for your open API metadata. So, if you're trying to be really exact with your Swagger documentation, you would normally be adding a whole bunch of hints about, hey, this is produces 201, they could be doing this, that, or the other. We're trying to make Wolverine take away that repetitive junk work, trying to get good open API documentation that matches the type signatures rather than making you explicitly go code that stuff everywhere. That's one part. Now, it's also returning something called start stream of incident. So, Oscar, I don't know if I've talked this one over with you very much. So, this is part of Wolverine's side effects model. So, what we're returning is the decision to, I want to start a new event stream with Martin using incident as our aggregate type. It's going to start with just one event, that incident logged event. So at no time are we doing any kind of asynchronous IO. All we're doing is pushing in the request data, a GUID for the customer ID that's coming from a route argument that's done with routing, and what time is it now? Coming out of that, we get, this is what the response should be. These are the events. This is the new event that should be appended to a new stream. The Martin middleware that we configured is seeing this, and it's knowing to take that start stream value, and it applies that to a Martin document session. And it handles all the asynchronous stuff for you. If we were also publishing, like if we had an active subscriber for the incident logged here, Oscar, that would also be published out through the outbox as this happens. So last point, and then I'm going to throw it back to you. Why I think this is valuable, a couple different things. One, we can handle this whole feature end to end in one file. I think that's a big deal. One of the things we're trying to aim for with Wolverine is enabling you to have code with adequately loose coupling, very high testability, low ceremony, and do all of that without very fancy, elaborate, clean, hexagonal onion architecture stuff that's just going to slow you down. That's an argument. I'm also hoping that by the signature of this, that this becomes something that's relatively easy to unit test. That, hey, if I put these inputs in, I expect this output. I don't have to set up mock objects. I don't have to spin up a DI container. I don't have to run through the database. I can measure the event that is decided to publish in a quick running unit test.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get off my soapbox on that one. Oscar, what do you think about this? Because I think you have some different opinions.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I like that. Especially that I'm quite spoiled in a way that I worked besides the .NET for a few years on the Node.js serverless approach. So once I did that for 2 or 3 years, then when I'm getting back to .NET, I'm always thinking, why do I need to do so many stuff? Why is it so heavy? So on that side, yeah, it looks really good to me. It would look even better if C# allowed to just define functions without the class, but that's a different story. The thing that I would say for me, I need to play with that more. So there are two things here. So one is like I like to do the explicit mapping between the HTTP API and contract and the regular comment. So I like to do this mapping explicitly in my code, because then I know that I can trust that that class. But on the other hand, I could probably configure the request in a way and validation either internally or use the Fluent validation stuff to be that certain. So that's one thing. I like to have this explicit place. So if, for example, Wolverine allowed me to do like, you know, some additional function here that would be responsible for mapping or validating the...
Which it does. It does.
So what would I need to do to have like, because just to show people the difference, in log incident request, I would probably normally even put it like null. So I would say that explicitly that I don't trust the outside world. I don't know about it. I know that people through web API can send anything. And then when I have that, then I typically sounds like, yeah, okay. Then I have much richer and validated class, and I already have here like this incident ID, customer ID, so I know it upfront, and then I run it through my handler that does the logic. So, and that's also another case that I like to separate I like to cut as much layers as I can, but I still like to have the clear separation between the communication protocol, so HTTP, REST, Rabbit, whatever I choose, and the domain logic. So I'm not saying that I don't like it. I'm just saying that definitely that's something that would be icking me at the beginning, but I think that I could probably get used to that enough, because I see huge benefits here. Like in this method, it's like pure function. There is no call to database, no additional stuff, because this start stream is just saying that I would like to have this stream started with this specific ID and having already this event or set of events. So I think that those would be the stuff, my concerns that I would have, but definitely it's nothing that would be a showstopper for me. I would need to just get used to that.
So this is already pretty simple by itself, but this is probably not a real world example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's tweak this to show off and try to address some of your concerns.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the validation, you could use fluid validation middleware right off the bat.
Yep.
That is an option with with Wolverine and what that would do if it was applied. That if you had any active validators for the log incident request input, Wolverine would see that and it would embed it directly into the code. If there were any validation failures, it would return use the problem detail spec to write out the response, and it would even alter the Open API Swagger documentation for your system to reflect that. So you wouldn't have to manually go put a bunch of attribute groups in for problem details. But if we wanted to do a little bit of one-off explicit validation here and still use problem details, so let's write another function here, public static, have it return problem details, and then call it before. We could call it validate, but then you'd have to put an attribute. If you want to call it validate, well, anyway, there's a way you could call it validate and then go stick an attribute on it.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the attribute is offhand, so let's not use that. Have that take in the log incident request. We're going to work on that. All right. So here, programmatically, let's say that all we care about is that you have a customer. Let's make it real simple. So if request.customer is null,
it doesn't have customer.
Well, I'd say description is null. Okay, if this happens, we want to get out of here. So create a new problem details, with, hey, and remember with problem details, you have to explicitly say the status. Because I get burned by this over and over again. So like this, yeah, whatever. And then say detail equals whatever just put a string descriptor. Okay. And then in the happy path, this is special to Wolverine. Say return Wolverine continue. No problems. All right. So this does what you just said. This will, when Wolverine generates the code at runtime, it's going to call this method before, then it's going to check. If the return value is Wolverine continue.no problems, hey, everything's good, just keep going. If it's a totally different problem details, it's going to stop. It's going to set the status code. It's going to apply the problem details to the response. It's going to set the status code. It's going to write the problem details out. It's going to set the content type to whatever problem detail is, and it's going to stop processing. And by doing what you did here, this is also going to be reflected in the Swagger page as well.
Yeah, maybe let's try to show how this will be generated.
Yeah, okay, do that. We would have to take away the minimal API endpoint before we ran it.
Correct.
No, that's okay. You'll show the code, the code generation first before we humiliate me by this not working.
Yeah. I just for the record, for other people, I would like to you to show how this generated code will look like if that works. Of course, I probably need to go deeper, like Inception.
The root of the project.
Yeah. So
and you already have Oakton hooked up. I think you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to say, I think that Jeremy already said that, but we are using extensively code generation also in Marten because we want to really, Jeremy is calling that a Matryoshka doll architecture. Can I call it architecture or approach?
Oh, absolutely. There's some historical. Let me follow up on that. You keep going though.
Yeah. So because of that, we try to avoid reflection as much as we can, and also like other lookups, dictionary lookups, etc. Because that's something that can bring you potentially the biggest performance. And it's funny that I'm saying that right now, because the first time Jeremy came and said to me, then I was like, hell no. I have so many bad experience in my past projects when I did code generation. But after, I think, 2 years, it's, I think, 2 years almost since the first time we used that in Martin, then I need to tell that, yeah, it's actually, you cannot beat that with anything. Because see, this is the class endpoint generated for Wolverine. And what it does, I mean, the code, of course, is generated, so it's not looking super sleek, but it's still, I think, readable. So see, you have the handle method with the HTTP context. You start by creating document session, then getting the request. Is it also the place where the validation is happening here?
So that's reading the request body.
Mm-hmm.
So that would stop if the JSON serialization failed. It would return. I've slept since then. I think it would return a 400 bad request, but that would stop. So that's just getting the request body,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's reading the route
Yeah.
input. It's defining now. Yep,
Yeah.
and you see then the next line on 39. This is where it's running the before middle, kind of middleware. It's really meant to. We sort of call this compound handlers, but keep going.
Yeah. So after that, we are calling this endpoint, and we are getting this start stream. And start stream, I think that we can also get with the great decompiler of JetBrains. So see, we are just calling start stream with the ID and the set of events that was returned here. And as at the end of that, we are calling save changes. So in general, this code, I think that I saw worse code in the controller methods in the projects that I've been. So yeah, I think that's pretty sleek. So I'm just explaining that because I really was like the first time I heard it, then I was really like, hell no, this will be a nightmare. But I'm taking that perspective back. I would be curious your thoughts and maybe your questions at that point. Do you have some that we should better clarify or explain?
So I'll throw before questions come in. I'll throw this in. So the kind of framework that the Wolverine is, it's using a lot of conventions. So there's potential for it to be too much magic. You know, it's using Martin transactional middleware. That side effect could be weird. The now thing is weird. So my hope is that being able to generate the code ahead of time or even preview it, this hopefully explains exactly, this is what Wolverine's doing. When you post to that HTTP endpoint, this is exactly what Wolverine this, but this is why it's doing this. I'm trying to explain it. Line when they're trying to troubleshoot the things themselves. But you know, also early adopters tend to be kind of do it yourself kind of folks. So all I'm going to say, long story short, that is my theory. It just hasn't. I need a lot more users to say yes, that is definitively true.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds cool. Just as an idea, right? To leverage the sort of generating to make it as smooth as possible, so that you can focus on your business stuff, right? Or just coding what is important. Actually, this is something what I understood from the articles, blog posts that you were posting. Basically, focus on what's core, leave the rest for the Wolverine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Oscar, sorry, I've been coached on how to say it correctly, but what's the doll's name here? Matryoshka?
Matryoshka, yeah.
Yes, Matryoshka.
Okay. Okay. I don't want to mispronounce that. So, but the stacking doll model. So basically every application framework like this has to support this model somehow. ASP.NET Core does it through middleware. In Service Bus copied Fubu's behavior model, but they do it more efficiently now. Mediator has their version as well. So I was on an older project called Fubu MVC about a decade ago that failed miserably, where we first used this kind of middleware model where it was very configurable. You could do it in by endpoint, policy by policy, whatnot. So obviously ran into the problem of this is too much magic. How is it being applied? So the code compilation. But then the other killer problem was you end up just absolutely killing garbage collector in your system because you're creating so many objects and wrapper classes, wrappers and wrappers and wrappers. And when things fail, you get epic stack traces. There's that joke about 10, 15 years ago that enterprise Java is a DSL to turn large piles of XML into massive stack traces.
Pure function, right?
So, yeah. So our experience with Fubu is, oh my God, I helped create a monster. So part of this model of Wolverine is trying to do the code generation. It's trying to remove the DI container completely from runtime. You see here, most things are static. It's either resolved as a singleton one time only. So there's a singleton of this thing in place, but after that, there's no DI container. There's no service location. It's create the objects you need, pass them in as thin as possible. And then the hope is by having this generated like this, that your stack traces are pretty narrow, pretty thin, so that when things inevitably go wrong, you can look right at a stack trace. There's where it's blowing up in my code, instead of having, this many middleware, and at the very bottom is the root cause, because the average developer cannot look through a massive stack trace.
Yeah, or rather would not like to do so, right? And just
Yeah.
focus on, yeah. And you mentioned also that it was turning the XML into the stack traces, and it's a brilliant metaphor, by the way. But I was wondering also about more like infrastructural things, in one of your recent blog posts about routing. You showed about how to write that Wolverine is able to route the messages, right, for the premium. I'm spoiling right now, sorry guys, for premium and regular users. And as I was wondering, because in RabbitMQ, for example, right, you can also leverage the broker itself, right, to do so. And I wonder how you are planning to do so based on various brokers, right? Because you can use RabbitMQ, Amazon SQS, right, and so on.
So, like in normal usage, let's take RabbitMQ, because that's actually what I'm most familiar with. RabbitMQ, when we publish a message, I would tell folks, and this is what I would say in my previous job: let's publish to an exchange. Where that exchange delivers it, I don't know. As much as possible, I want to leverage RabbitMQ routing so that we don't have to have a lot of knowledge as a publisher where these things go downstream. That blog post you referred to, that was from work with Wolverine client, where it's kind of an IoT application where they need to encode from information in code. They need to have complete control over which device am I sending this particular message to. So that was an exception case.
So basically, there was a context built in, right, in the Wolverine client, basically. Okay.
Yeah, but I would say as much as possible. So I'm trying to make it as much as possible that you can leverage every last bit of functionality in the underlying infrastructure,
Mhm.
and let it do what it's good at. But you can also do programmatic routing in Wolverine if you need to.
Okay, so basically it's not like any lock-in, it's more like you can still leverage, you should be able, right? Leverage what's underlying infrastructure. Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Yep. There is a question from Frederick. So the question is, so the general handler method is implemented async, but you don't mark it as async when you write the handler method. Is this always the case?
So you can, we didn't need to do anything asynchronous there. So you could write this very explicitly. You could take in the Martin iDocument session. You could turn off the middleware. You could call Martin save document changes yourself. If I was doing any kind of IO here, or let's say I had to exercise call a web service, this would absolutely have to be asynchronous, and you would have to mark this as asynchronous. Wolverine, by doing the transactional stuff around it and the code generation, it's Wolverine's own adapter is asynchronous. You saw that. I think as much as possible, you can simplify your code. If you can make it synchronous, I think that's easier to write unit tests around it. So that's why we put so much effort into being able to do that. Want to get to the point where your message handlers or your HP handlers, that's about mostly deciding what should be done. This existing data should be transformed in this way. We should publish out these extra commands to take further actions, these events, decide what to do next, or decide, what changes should be made to the database, and then let Wolverine middleware around it handle the IO and the side effects and whatever it is. I guess I'm slowly starting to be converted to being almost a functional programmer, not quite. So let's call it FP curious.
But you know that it's recorded.
I am going to take crap from the F# community on any given month, no matter what happens.
Yeah, but Frederick, this is an example that you could write it, the handler in the sync way. So like this way. So you could have still inject some document session and do it, but probably it's not, you don't need to do it that way, because the business logic is here, and the other stuff, of course, if you are following the the convention on the typical stuff, then it should in general just aggregate the state of the event and then process the business logic based on the state, and after that return event or events and store it. So in Wolverine, as I understand, then you just implement this last part, almost the last part, right, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Maybe we could show like how you could do update, because I think that's quite interesting.
Here, I have one pre-built.
Nice.
Here, Oscar in. Oscar, I'm going to send it to you in Discord.
Sure. Works for me.
So different endpoint, but this shows off, I think, the aggregate handler stuff. I think that's where you're going.
Yeah. So let me create another file. Cool. No. That's annoying from Rider. Each time I create new solution, then it asks me about that. Why? Okay. Let's do it like that. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, so what we have here is the categorization of the incident, so update. So maybe Jeremy Would you like to tell more about that?
Yeah. This is like find the code again.
You
Okay.
should.
I haven't been on as many Zoom meetings lately, so I'm getting awkward with Zoom. Um, so this is Wolverine plus Martin's version of the decider pattern, or it's at least very closely inspired by the decider pattern. So what varies here is given a new command that refers to an existing incident aggregate. Um, we want to decide how this should change state. So you see the normal Wolverine post we've been doing, but there's also another attribute there called aggregate handler. So that is explicitly opting into some behavioral middleware Wolverine Martin helper. So if we look down our command categorize incident, Oscar, probably better have you show that code real quick. Yeah. So the GUID incident ID there, the naming convention, we're trying to refer to incident. So by calling it incident ID, that tells Wolverine this is the identifier for the incident aggregate. The other thing I want to call out, the version property. So this is what we're saying here is that this command was issued against assuming that you were starting at a known version of the incident. So in the UI, if we are working on what we think is version 5 of the incident and we post this, if somebody else has updated the incident since this was issued, Martin can actually detect that and fail here on a concurrency exception. So let's come down to the handler and I'll try to talk about how that gets worked out. So all we have to do is take in the command and we take in the existing incident. This aggregate, Wolverine's able to load it from Martin. If it is something that needs to be a live projection where Martin needs to fetch the events and build it up on the fly, Martin and Wolverine buy them together. They're doing that for you and they're just pushing it into your handler. So the only thing you need to care about is at any one time is given the current state of the incident and this command, what events should I emit? With that event forwarding trick that we talked about before, that would also allow us to carry out additional actions based on the events that are happening here as an additional separately error tracked kind of queued off thing off to the side. But this enables us to focus strictly on business logic and deciding what should be captured, what should be changed, what should happen next. So I would assume that there would be possibly validation logic here. You could optionally go look up other reference data. You could call other services. But in the end, you're returning that incident categorized. It is assuming that any return value there's some exceptions, but that is going to be an event that's going to be appended on to this event stream by Martin. And for Oscar's sake, in case there are real DDD people watching this, Wolverine absolutely supports a model where it could be IEnumerable of objects, where you could return more than one event. So we're not saying that a decider pattern means one command, one event. Just be clear.
So I have a question about that. Is it possible, because I mean, I see the benefit of having this before, but before I would like to use like for some pre-validation or, you know, some stuff that I would like to do before that. So let's say that, of course, this is a valid case, like to just ensure that we can run the business logic if it's not close, etc. But let's say that I would like to have that part here. So is it possible to return either event or problem details from here, or you need to do it like you did here? Is it possible to, or throw exception and
Throw an
then
exception. I would I would say throw an exception, and like you were saying, where you rely on middleware, ASP.NET Core middleware to map the exception to problem details. Yeah, I would just throw the exception there.
Okay, so I could throw invalid, whatever. And I can still, so could I still plug into the regular exception handling middleware here?
Yeah, it's so we're trying to be so it's a different world. ASP.NET Core itself is actually pretty modular today. It's not like it was 10 years ago where FuboVC or Nancy or Service Stack was trying to be its own completely separate thing. This is just part of the ASP.NET Core world. So this is inside of your basic ASP.NET Core middleware. So the OpenID middleware, exception handling middleware that's more cross-cutting and generic in ASP.NET Core today, that is absolutely usable with this. You would even be able to mix and match Wolverine endpoints with MVC controllers, because Wolverine will never support Razor. You could mix and match with minimal API if you wanted. So yes, everything that you use in the ASP.NET Core today should be completely usable inside of Wolverine, because we're trying to be a good citizen here.
And what would happen if I had such code like we see here, not in the HTTP endpoint, but for example, in some handler, like additional handler, like let's say I would be doing some sort of distributed process when after some event, I would like to, publish some command and then handle it. What would happen if I throw exception?
So, okay, if you were using this inside of asynchronous messaging instead, is that what you mean?
Yes.
So that's getting into a complicated topic all by itself. But the Wolverine error handling is very configurable. You've got a lot of different options. So you can teach it to understand, is this a transient error, and go ahead and try again a little bit. That's fine. Or is this I'm gonna have to look at the documentation. I've slept since then. I think opt-out handlers. Oh, here. Sorry, hang on. You didn't prep me for this one.
See?
Let me look at the documentation.
At least people will know that we are not going through the script. Yeah.
Here, let me shoot you something in the chat. So just on opt itself, say on exception.
See, I'm not good on copy and pasting. Yep.
So, and that would give, it is an extension method, watch that. There's a lot more stuff you can do here. You can throw it to dead letter queue. You can say, I want to retry, but with a little bit of back off time to let it rest. I can say, because I've been working with really, really bad third-party integrations the last 5 years, you can say, nope, this means that no processing is possible whatsoever. Stop. You can establish circuit breakers. You could requeue it, and you could do completely custom actions. So that's beyond the scope of today, but you could say, send a message back to execute this completely other message, which may be generate an SMS message to support, hey, this really bad thing happens, stop your launch, go fix it. You got a lot of power. Does that answer kind of what you were looking for?
Yep. And is this the next question that I didn't ask you before, but let's go further, because there is this mediator style also in memory. So is that different, the exception handling part, or resiliency in that regards? Because quite often, I mean, I did that in past. I'm not proud of it, but I did that. So I was using the mediator and just publishing messages and tried to build some unit of work around it to either sometimes handle all at once, sometimes not. What's the strategy here if we'd like to use Wolverine as, in-memory processing?
Sure. Okay, so that's actually a complicated discussion. So if we were using just a straight up endpoint, the HTTP endpoint, there's no retries, there's nothing. It's going to fail. But my idea there is you just want immediately to let the caller know, but this broke. It's all on their side. So on the other extreme, let's leave mediator to third. If you're in asynchronous messaging world, which I'm going to tell you, if you need a system to be resilient, to be able to get past hiccups, moving as much work to asynchronous messaging as possible, I think is going to lead to a much more resilient system. It's going to lead to a system that can self-heal because you can just do so much more with error handling inside the system. So in the asynchronous messaging, like I said, you have configurable retries. You can discard messages like, nope, this would never be valid. This is a totally invalid message. Throw it away. I don't even want this in the dead letter queue. I can say throw it in a dead letter queue where maybe it could be processed later if things got fixed. I could say try this again, but in 30 minutes. Like maybe, hey, maybe the system will be better off back then. You can say that's it. Stop the line. No more processing. The downstream system. This system is totally hosed. Nothing's going to work. Just stop until somebody fixes it, right? Or say stop all processing for 30 minutes. I'd say synchronously. Now, coming in the middle, if you're using Wolverine as a mediator, which, I have strong opinions about this, Oscar. If you were delegating from minimal API or MVC controller to Wolverine as a mediator, just like you use Jimmy Bogart's mediator. So now I'm using a capital M mediator. So Wolverine's a little more, it is a little bit more robust than Jimmy's mediator. It has limited retries, so it honors any kind of, your line on 41, can you change that to, instead of move to error queue, could you say retry? Retry with cooldown. Okay, now could you say, I'm making things up here, folks. Could you say, no, say 100 milliseconds. You got our fancy, okay. So say 100 milliseconds and 250 milliseconds, and you see where this goes. Good enough. So that retry, that would be done if you called Wolverine as a mediator. It would try to retry things with your retry policies there. But it would ignore any kind of requeue or dead letter queue. It would just, if it exceeds its retries, it's going to throw the raw exception back to the caller. So that gives you a little bit of resiliency if you want to go from website to an action with a little bit of retries for transient errors. There's still value in calling invoke as a mediator in that particular case. So that's something that Jimmy Bogart's mediator does not do. But I think my personal opinion, theory, and I think a lot of people have told me the same thing. I think that most people use mediator. Well, the ones that aren't just copying it because they saw somebody smart using it and they just copied it. MVC controllers can very easily get out of control. They can become too big, too hairy. It's just even very well-meaning, good teams. It gets out of control very easily. I think people use the MVC controller mediator combination as a way to control the complexity of an MVC controller by saying the MVC controller is really just a routing table that immediately delegates to a mediator, and mediator kind of forces me to only handle one message in one handler class, and that helps me manage the complexity of all this junk that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go on. So sorry.
No, so my hope with Wolverine is, for the most part, you can control the complexity without having to introduce that extra bouncing layer of endpoint to mediator to handler to, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I was a big fan of mediator at some point, but then it started also to iking me more, and maybe let's start from the end. So the funny part, I'm on my CQRS talk. If I'm giving that about .NET, then I'm usually asking people, how many of you are using Mediator? Like 50, 75% of people at least are raising their hand. And then I'm asking how many of you used stuff like pipelines, behaviors, so all that stuff that I would consider that Mediator could bring to the table. Because if it's just used to, as you said, to just move the code from controller to some other place, then for me, it's just adding the next level of indirection. I would use like in-memory processing if I would like to be sure that I have precisely the same middleware, no matter if I call it through HTTP API or some messaging API. And that I would say that this approach is beneficial. But from my experience of what I'm talking with people, maybe people that are on the call can tell if that's correct or not also in their experience. But usually people are just using it to, even probably it's kind of fashionable, or it's like the first step to do CQRS, which is fine. But yeah, for example, I don't like about Mediator that it's forcing me to use some interfaces to tag my messages, what type are them, etc. I don't like that. So I like that in Wolverine, you don't have to do it. But on the other hand, as you saw when I was preparing to our webinar, I also was a few times maybe not irritated, but surprised, but that I wasn't able to just always find the conventional thing. But that's always like pros and cons. Either you are strict and shaping the API like fully strict with all those weird guards like marker interfaces, or you are more flexible, but then sometimes you need to get the muscle memory to be more efficient on that. So yeah, but I like that. And one thing that is, in my opinion, visible, and what was also new for me, is that, for example, those parameters, is that I spent a lot of time in projects that were API first. So our API had to be also kind of product, etc. So that's, I'm like to prepare, those, I wouldn't call them REST URLs because they are just URLs. REST is not saying about the URL format, or at least that's not the most important thing in REST. But I quite often like to structure hierarchical and then getting those parameters from the API. So you can get it in Wolverine also, but then you don't have them in before. So it's much more ergonomic in Wolverine to put it in the message body, right? So you would normally, if I was doing more Jeremy's way, then I would move those here, right, Jeremy?
Yes, and I don't. So I think that's a place where I'm going to say this is probably more preference than anything.
Mm-hmm.
my strong preference, I think it makes it even easier from the client side if you embed everything into the body. So like, a good example is you were using the E-tag header to pass the stream version through in your initial version of that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just,
Let me show that to people. Yeah, so I was taking that version from ETAG, like from the request header, and then passing it to Martin. So yeah, sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
no, this is just a great example. This is just a place where Oscar and I are just a little bit different. So partially, I'm honestly, a lot of this is I think of endpoints. This actually goes back to that FUBU project 10 years, 10, 12, 15 years ago. The idea that we model HP endpoints is one model in, one model out, that you are sending a command. You don't want to use HP in a non-idiomatic way, but at the same time, the conventions for Wolverine and Martin, it all works a lot easier if everything's just posted as one command. I think it's easier as the client to just embed everything in the body. So you don't have to worry too much about the URL pattern. Definitely don't want to have to worry about passing headers, if you're doing this programmatically. So yeah, the existing mechanics just assume all the information is on the request body, and it makes it very easy to work in a conventional way. I don't know if I would even. I don't know that I think it's a good idea to try to combine inputs from quite so often from headers to whatnot in the body. Into the actual processing. That was something I saw be very confusing to FUBU users years ago. So that's maybe where some of my bias came from, Oscar.
Yeah, so I think I'm fine with like reusing that in body, but like year ago or 2 ago, I discovered this Mozilla Developer Network site, which is for years, but I was amused how much stuff you can do and how much stuff is already well thought around API if we just use the HTTP headers correctly, and how much stuff can we get out of that, like long polling, retry after, etc. So I really like that, but you are not blocking anything because you could put also here from header, but maybe let me try to, because my observation was that in Wolverine you are treating HTTP more like yet another sort of transport for the messages, kinda, because if we try to put as much as we can into the request body, then those endpoints are looking quite similar to what we would probably have as just message handlers. Is it correct, or am I
No,
just
that's very fair. I'm also trying to set this code up to be easily testable. And just to make it as clear as possible. And Oscar, while I let the dog out for a second, make it very clear. You can bypass all of the Wolverine conventions and all that magic stuff, and just go write explicit code. Go work directly with HP context. Do whatever you want. Wolverine will not stop you from getting to the full power of the HP runtime.
Yeah. But when I was preparing for the workshop, then I was trying to also understand the convention and ergonomy, because usually if you are taking framework, then of course you should be able to somehow bend it to your needs and make it more flexible. But as
which you
always,
could, which you can. Everything you're asking about is actually there is an avenue to customize Wolverine to introduce your own conventional handling if you want to do that, and if you decide that is actually a good idea.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it's always better when we are choosing framework to find those that in the majority are matching our preferred way of dealing with stuff. Because if not, then we will be constantly fighting with the with it, and being frustrated, etc. So it's always good to try to go fully with the like recommended way, trying to understand the motivation behind the framework, and then just compare it with whether this is good for us or not. At least that's how I usually try to figure out the framework.
Or really, just to agree with you, um, I think you're always best off if you can use a tool the idiomatic way that it was designed to be, because that puts you in a well lit path of how this thing is used and what where the bugs have been ironed out. So exactly what Oscar said. Find Pick out a tool that works the way you want to work instead of trying to force a tool to fit your notions. And with Wolverine, I would rather you be happier with a different tool than mad at me because you're using Wolverine and you don't like it.
Mhm. Yeah, so we already had webinar with Alexei that is showing I think trying to solve similar stuff with a different approach. Like Alexei's Eventures is much more explicit, no conventional. So it's always worth to compare that. But yeah, I can say that I enjoyed this transition. I haven't fully yet. My repository is in progress. I think that I will try to finish that in the next few days and to make it fully aligned with the Wolverine, to also learn more about the conventions and how to use them and get the fully my perspective. But so far I like it. Of course, the conventional stuff is, as we discussed, can be challenging, but on the messaging there is a huge deal of helpers around diagnostic, and there are already blog posts, Jeremy, how to solve that. So I think that we are talking over 1 hour and a half, so we could be starting to wrapping that up. But I would like, if you have some questions, then we are happy to answer a few more. Eric is asking Bucky's or Quick Trip. I don't know what's that, but is it a US thing? There is
Yeah,
on
Quick
the
Trip to me is a chain of convenience stores back home. I don't know if that's what he means though.
yeah, gas station near Texas. I don't know if you are. I mean, in Poland, we are always choosing the cheapest one, at least of what I know. Thanks, Eric. Any other questions? Like, I can ask Star Trek or Star Wars in a similar spirit, but maybe don't start the war.
Yes, so maybe I have a question, as you mentioned, Oscar, Alexei's Eventures. I'm wondering, Jeremy, if you had or if you planned to just have a chat with similar, with people like Alexei who is building similar stuff, like just to have an inspiration or cross flow kind of verification. I'm just curious, right?
It would probably be helpful. That's partially what I have Oscar for. Um, there's one significant feature that Eventuous has that I want in Martin whenever we can get around to it. Like Oscar, I want to utilize. We've talked about this using Postgres sharding to
Mm-hmm.
separate cold events from active events. I think that would be a massive win for us. But Eventuous it's starting from a very different aesthetic. Of course, Oscar knows this. My big thing is I want low ceremony code. the lowest ceremony code possible. I think Eventuous is high ceremony. So, guys, don't throw things at me. That's my perspective. I I have definitely gotten some inspiration for Venturous for, especially that hot cold. But I think Wolverine and Martin is taking such a different approach. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
maybe not exactly what you're asking.
Yeah. I mean, still, thanks for the answer. I was more curious about like having interaction with other creators, right? Like Alexei and so on, because I can imagine that this kind of collaboration might give at least some ideas. Like as you mentioned, Jeremy, the hot and cold events and segregation of them, right?
It does. In a small world. So I was at the KCDC conference about 6 weeks ago, and there's a little stretch where Ian Cooper from Brighter and Chris Patterson of Mass Transit, we had a long hallway conversation, just catching up. I mean, we know each other for years. Yeah, that's been awesome. I got to tell you, from my side, I haven't been out in public a lot since the pandemic. So I would sure like to be. I would like to do a lot more of that in the future. And some of that is, when is it okay to travel and leave the family alone and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, Eric wrote that I recently told someone, paraphrased, I don't want to work on a project without something like Wolverine or Avengers. I don't want to remake the same base internal library. I think that I would agree to that because some stuff can be simply done, but getting the production ready, resiliency, error handling, and especially like async daemon is like so complex. Probably it should be less complex, but but it is really complex thing to make it right. And my guess is that some internals of Wolverine is precisely the same. And I mean, it's nice to play with tech stack, but why not always that's the best to make for the client's money, right? At least not for the clients. For us, it might be better than for them.
I know I've had really bad experiences where we were not able to use something off the shelf. Back then it was Hyatt wouldn't let us use mass transit, wouldn't pay for in-service bus, and we had to write our own kind of half-assed, homegrown version of part of what Wolverine is to talk to RabbitMQ. It's the air handling, the circuit breaker, all that stuff that's really time consuming. Yeah, it's dumb to roll that your own when you could use something off the shelf, but I mean, that's clients for you.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I even wrote on the talk the event story in 25 minutes, but not for the sake of showing how to do it on prod. There is another question. Any plans for adding SQL transport? This would be great for projects that already uses SQL Server Postgres without having to add in one more thing to manage.
That's a long topic all by itself. Yes, but I'm a little scared of it. I saw mass transit. You're asking, do we talk to other tool companies? Mass transit just added that themselves. I did kind of talk to Chris Patterson a little bit about that. I feel good about doing a Postgres version. Somebody came pretty close to having a Postgres transport for Wolverine. Wolverine Postgres has the PG notify and listen kind of thing where you can reach out and say, you can do call outs from the database and say, hey, I have something. You always worry because database is really, you end up pulling against the database. The database is not a queue. There's all kinds of reasons why that's not necessarily a good idea, but sorry, that is a long-winded way of saying yes, but there are technical details to work out to make sure that it actually works well. So yeah.
Yeah, plus logical replication, but I shouldn't tell that. But yeah.
It's the problem is
I've
this is a politically incorrect story. It's a tar baby.
yeah.
It looks like something that would be fun to reach up and touch, but it's a morass.
Mm.
You know, it's a land war in Southeast Asia. It sounds simple, but it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that's simple, but I would say that because we were discussing that, and that's a inner joke. Sorry for that, around async daemon. But I recently thought when I saw those questions on Wolverine channel, um, that actually logical replication would make much more sense for Wolverine than for Martin, and that would be probably easier to do because you don't need to deal with I mean, you can just take order as it is, but yeah, I mean, that's a longer story, not for today's webinar. Sorry for that. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, so if nothing will show up, then I will try to wrap it up. So we learned today the basics. I think that we just, wrote two endpoints and added few configuration, but actually that's the basic stuff that how you can start with Wolverine. While preparing, I can say that that's really true. And Jeremy also show us how to then potentially even republish that to in-memory queues or to some external transport. And I think and I hope that through those discussions, you also learned, because I learned, so that's good, at least for me, some motivation and some idea on how to deal with complexity and how to make it easier, and how to, that not all stuff needs to be complicated. Some has to be complex, but not necessarily complicated. So I hope that it was a good piece for you to understand better, the design motivation and architecture behind Wolverine. So yeah, thank you. Jeremy, would you like to add something for the end?
Oh no, just thanks everybody. Hopefully this will be the first of many. We might try for shorter, more focused talks next time. But yeah, Oscar and I have talked about doing something like this for a long time, so it was good to get the ball rolling. And thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you. One last question. I think that it would be good to answer because there is a question about the licensing support will be done on Critter Stack.
Do you want to take this one, Oscar, or you want me to try first?
I think that you can take it. Feel free to do it.
So the core of what's already out there, Oscar, you jump in anytime. The core of what's out there, the idea is that's always going to be MIT. So Oscar and I, Babu, that's the third member of the Martin core team that works with us as well. We are trying to build a sustainable business model around the whole critter stack. We also know a lot of folks won't use it unless there is a company, but there's one throat to choke. So we're trying to get things together to be able to start offering professional support contracts with, against the open source core. We are also going to build some add-on products for the full critter stack that will be commercial products on top of the core. So there'll be stuff for like the really complicated stuff, like being able to do blue-green deployment with the Martin Event Store. So being able to roll out new versions of projections with zero downtime. Being able to scale the event store, the projection model over multiple nodes, so it's infinitely scalable. That's a lot of stuff that's still over the horizon, but there will be commercial offerings and there'll be support contracts, but trying to keep the existing core completely OSS going forward. Hopefully that answers things. There's still some stuff we haven't figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that from my perspective, I don't have, I think that it's similar for Jeremy. I don't have any plans to rule the world, but the reasons why we drop our regular employment was to make to be able to more focus on the critter stack, so Marten, Wolverine, etc., and do it better. And that, of course, includes eventually some support and some other stuff. But the intention behind it is to give more, proof that we won't run away. I think that's really important for the bigger companies, and also for us to make it more sustainable, to be able to focus. Right now, we are also doing some consultancy. We are trying to help to either teach like event sourcing or how to run Marten and Wolverine correctly. And so far so good, but we would like to also have more sustainability to deliver more stuff and give more stuff, probably also for free, as Jeremy said. So no plans to do any dick moves. But yeah, we are not trying to hide that we would like to get some money to out of it finally, because we were really terrible about that, I think.
Well, if we have a sustainable business model about this, then the Critter Stack is a much less riskier tool for everyone else to use. So
Yep.
there's that as well. Plus, I don't want to have to go back and get a real job and have Zoom meetings all day again.
Yeah, only 2 hours meeting from time to time. Okay, cool. Thanks you folks. Thanks for patience. I know that it was a bit sidetracks, but we wanted to make it, I mean, we knew that it will be a bit chaotic. So thank you all for staying with us for so long. We really appreciate that. Our debut. We will discuss how we will move further. There are some plans to maybe even make it publicly, like Twitch, YouTube, maybe again on Architecture Weekly webinar. We probably will publish this in a week or two also publicly, but to give you some more exclusivity, it won't be immediately, but with some delay. But yeah, thank you a lot. I mean, for me, it was a pleasure and a lot of fun. Thanks, Jeremy, for joining and for sharing all of that with us. So thanks, folks. And once the recording is out, I will publish again and send email and on the Discord channel. So thank you. Have a good day and good night. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.